Right, good afternoon to all of you, and I'm very happy to be able to welcome you, our virtual audience, to ISMEO, the International Association for Mediterranean and Oriental Studies based in Rome, Italy. Through the organization of conferences, meetings and presentations, publication and archaeological campaigns, ISMEO promotes study, research programs and cultural collaboration related to countries of Asia, Africa and their interaction with the Mediterranean basin. At ISMEO, we created this music series called Oriental Music Conversations as a platform to share newest scholarly and creative work with the members and the public. So my name is Salvatore Morra and I'm the music curator of ISMEO. So some technical information about today's talk. The conversation is recorded and it will last for about 40 minutes, after which we will take audience questions for about 10 minutes. At any time during the event, you can use the chat features on your screen to submit your questions. And please mute yourself during the whole talk. We also would like to thank the Indian Embassy and the Festival of India in Italy. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Laura Leante, who is the Associate Professor in Ethnomusicology at Durham University. Her research interests include North Indian classical and folk music, music of South Asian diaspora, performance analysis, and popular music. So welcome, Laura, and the floor is yours after the phone ring.
Thank you very much, Salvatore. I would like to thank ISMEO and for this great opportunity. I am honored, and I would like to thank Salvatore and Priscilla also for being very patient and looking after me in the previous days, setting up the topic of this conversation and doing several tests. And let's hope it all goes smoothly. It's an honor to talk ISMEO, but also to be in Rome. I am Roman myself, brought up in Rome. I studied in Rome. So it is a beautiful opportunity for me from every point of view. What I will talk about today, as the title of the seminar indicates, is my research on a North Indian or Hindustani classical music, and in particular issues around interaction in performance. Probably we can move swiftly to the, I will show you a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and I will play you some video clips from both performances and interviews. So if we can transfer the host to me so that then I can move with the sharing, I will proceed straight away.
Thank you. Now you can.
Okay.
Now we can start.
No, that's fine. Now we can start.
We'll start. Thank you.
Okay. So as I said, I'm going to talk about interaction in the performance of North Indian classical music, and in particular, for this presentation, I'm going to draw on the research and fieldwork that I've been carrying out in mostly in India since 2003. And this research has been carried out to a large extent with Martin Clayton, and the fieldwork that I'm going to draw on mostly also with Simone Tarsitani and Tarun Nayak. I can't list all the fantastic musicians that have made this research possible, without whom I wouldn't be able to tell you anything here today, and I have acknowledged here those that feature directly in this presentation, although the full list of friends that helped me carrying out this work is much longer. So to start reflecting a bit on the study of interaction in music performance, we need to always take into account three major aspects. The first one, we need to consider the status of musicians who are performing, whereby status is meant the musician's professional standing, their importance in relation to other performers and participants, but also the musician roles within the music event. And these are topics that I'm going to focus on. And the third aspect, which is quite crucial, is how strategies, the ways and the strategies that musicians can deploy in order to negotiate their status in performance. So music performance becomes an arena, a forum where to reinforce, assert, or challenge status, and the result is affected by all these dynamics. In this short presentation, I will refer mostly to classic work in sociology by Erving Goffman, but I will also draw on more recent work in ethnomusicology by Thomas Putturino and other scholars as well, but these are my two main references. And when we talk about North Indian or Hindustani classical music, for those who might not be familiar with it, we are talking about an art tradition in which a soloist, also called the main artist, leads one or more accompanists. And Hindustani classical concerts are conceived in a way which is in line with the model of presentational performance proposed, theorized by ethnomusicologist Thomas Turino. Here, musicians perform for an audience which is physically separate and which has come just to listen to their music. Musical forms are closed, the texture of the music is not dense, and a strong emphasis is put on individual virtuosity. And this is in opposition to the other model theorized by Turino, which is that of participatory performance. This performance is conceived as non-participatory. And I will somehow challenge this assumption as we go on. But let's look now at the context of the music performance. Musicians agree, in general, most musicians agree on the positive effects that interaction with a knowledgeable, responsive audience can have on the outcome of the concert. There is not a unanimous view here, but many believe that interacting with a knowledgeable audience is going to put them in the right frame of mind and is going to help the production of the felicitous outcome of the performance. So I will stop now and I will play you a very short video clip of a performance of North Indian classical music. These are very long performances. I'm just going to share a brief excerpt. This is Khayal Singh. Khayal is the most commonly performed genre of North Indian classical music, vocal genre, North Indian classical music these days. And this is a concert which was filmed in 2010 by singer Manjari Asanare Kelkar in the city of Nasik in India. It's a short excerpt, and I like this shot because we can also see the audience sitting in the front rows. And I'll play it for you. So, in North Indian classical music performance, the spatial layout of participants reflects the needs to facilitate certain kinds of interactions. But most of all, it also maps onto particular hierarchies, particular musical hierarchies. So what is going on in the video clip that we were just watching. Let's look. This is a typical layout of a vocal performance in North Indian classical music. We have the audience, the singer, the soloist, the main artist, the leading figure is the one who decides the melodic material, the raga that is being performed, the composition, is the person that decides everything, sits in the center where he or she can interact with the largest number of participants. At the right of the singer, there is a drum player here on tabla, and at the left of the singer sits a harmonium player or sometimes another melodic instruments that provides a melodic support. So the tabla, the drum, provides the rhythmic accompaniment, and the harmonium provides the melodic accompaniment. And the harmonium actually is copying the vocal line, is following it. It's like a shadow. It shadows it at a split of a second behind. And at the back of the stage sit two musicians who pluck the drone, the tampura, and provide vocal support if necessary. These are most commonly students of the main singer, and are the two people here who have the lowest status in performance. They are the people who have the lowest, they enjoy the lowest rank of importance. They are expected not to move much. They're expected to keep a very restrained comportment, sing with a soft voice, and they're not really important. Sometimes they're not even introduced by name, let's say, although their role is very significant in the performance. The tabla and the harmonium player are the two people who can interact with other participants a bit more after the soloist, and they can also interact with the audience. So these, what I just illustrated now, are the musical roles and the music hierarchies that regulates every vocal performance in this genre, in this tradition. And for instrumental performance, it would be very similar. There would always be the soloist and the accompanist. And the very name accompanist indicates a kind of a subordinate status. Okay, so these are the music hierarchies. But the music hierarchies are not the only form of social relations that we can witness in a performance. So if we go back to the concert that I just played you before, here you can see that the singer is the leading person, but the two girls, the two young women at the back are her students, as I said before. So there is also a social relationship here of teacher and student, which is another form of relationships, which, however, maps onto the musical relationship where the teacher is always a higher status. But the harmonium player is also the father of the girl sitting at the back. And these family relationships are not uncommon. The main artist can bring their son or their daughter or a nephew or a niece to learn the music, okay, to join the stage. So family relationships can also be there. And last but not least, in this particular concert, the main artist is also paying the two accompanists. The students play for free, but the two accompanists can be usually paid either by a concert organizer or by the soloist themselves. So we have another form of social relation here, which is that of employer-employee. So it is a complex set of relationships, but as I said before, they are quite uncontroversial because they all map and reinforce the musical hierarchies where the soloist is the leader. However, there can be cases which are not uncommon in which other form of social relationships can create more controversial and difficult situations. There can be social criteria that challenge the musical relationships and hierarchies. And the one criterion which is quite problematic is the criterion of seniority. And seniority, for those who are familiar with Indian culture, is an important element that regulates life in everyday relationships. It's important at every level, from family level to any other realm. So there is a great respect to the people who are considered senior, and the seniors expect a form of deference from the juniors. Now, this is already quite complicated, but it gets even more interesting because the very way that seniority is conceived in Indian music is ambiguous, or at least seniority in North Indian classical music can refer to demographic, to age, so someone who is actually in age older than someone else, but seniority can also refer to music proficiency. So you can have a person that is quite young, but is very advanced in the career, so they have a form of musical seniority. There is quite a shade of ambiguity in everyday discourse, and it is part of the game. So you can hear people talking about someone senior, referring to either or the two concepts, or both. The two forms of seniority. So you can imagine that the situation gets quite complicated if the singer, for example, is quite young and is accompanied by a more senior tabla player. Now, whether he's older or is more senior professionally, well, then the singer, while still having allegedly, nominally, a leading role, they still have to respect and show some form of deference towards the senior accompanists who are there. And this is why sometimes it's quite difficult. Sometimes singers have their own accompanists because they know them, they feel confident with them, they've played with them for a long time. However, in North Indian classical music, you don't always see the team performing. Sometimes a singer is assigned accompanist by a festival organizer or a concert organizer, and sometimes the musicians play together for the first time on stage. So musicians who are quite senior and they're quite famous, they can demand their own accompanist, so that they already know who they play with and they have relationships that are already consolidated. But especially younger people, or within the context of a big festival, sometimes the singers are not able to ask for their accompanist and they get whoever they're assigned. And this means that this music not only is improvised in terms of music structure, because this is a music that is to a very large extent improvised, but even the social relationships are discovered on stage while the music is taking place. It is about getting to know each other and trying to deploy what is the etiquette in order to create a strong bond on the spot. Sometimes it's possible, very often it is possible, sometimes it gets more complicated. So just to, there are cases where real frictions take place on stage, real struggles, and this is very rarely visible to the wider audience. Very often this happens in subtle ways, because after all, it is in everyone's interest to make the audience happy and not to make the audience perceive that some tension might be there. But to the expert eye, of course, these negotiations are quite visible. So to summarize, in North Indian classical music, the relationships between soloist and accompanist is crucial for a successful performance. A poor match can lead to disastrous results with a good combination, while a good combination helps to bring the best out of gifted and highly trained artists. As we said before, performance is regulated by musical roles, for example, that of a soloist and accompanist, but also extra musical hierarchies, of which seniority is the one that is the most complex, the one that can create problematic situations in performance, and is also the category that people talk more about. Every musician will be able to tell you about stories they have seen, experiences that they've had, especially when they're young. Dealing with these challenges is is part of developing experience of being a musician. So it's part of everyone's early days discovery and learning process. There are other categories, I should add, which are very important in Indian society, but they're not really part of the musician's discourse. These can be, for example, issues of caste, religion, social class, and gender, of course. But musicians don't talk about that very much. When they are asked in interviews, they don't think that these hierarchies can shape or affect performance that much. In my experience as a researcher, I have seen instances where I think the gender might have played a part in shaping relationships on stage. But the truth is that every event I have seen, in every case, I have seen some form of tension. Seniority was the meta category that could in itself explain everything that was going on. And seniority is the category that musicians talk about. So conflict, as we said, can arise from the friction between overlapping hierarchies. And negotiation of status in performance can affect the production of musical sound, as I said at the very beginning. So I think I'll spend the next few minutes giving you some examples of how this negotiation of status can affect the production of musical sound. And in particular, I'll play you now two video clips from two interviews carried out with two very senior, now you know what I mean, tabla players from Calcutta. One is late Pandit Shankar Ghosh, and the other one is Sanjay Mukherjee, both established tabla players. The interviews are in English, but I have added Italian subtitles also because the audio is not very good, especially in the first one. There was a very nice sound you can spot of Indian electricity playing the light at the back. So what I'll do, I'll play you the two interviews, and the first one is with Shankar Ghosh. Okay.
Sometimes this special position clicks.
Sorry, he's referring to the special position between so we've asked him in the interview, as a tabla player, sometimes you can find yourself in a special position, that you find yourself as a senior tabla player in a concert in which there is some tension between the singer and the other accompanist, the harmonium player. So what do you do if you find yourself in that position as a senior musician? So I'll start again, sorry.
Sometimes this special position clicks, because then I have to care for the soloist, the main vocalist, and also the harmonium player. If the harmonium player is playing too much, surpassing the soloist, then I have to play something to give him reminder that you are playing not so good, so be careful. There are some way of that. The tabla players also have some weapons in the pocket. how to whether a bomb or a dagger or no some patting.
Would you do it in gesture or playing specific?
Playing specific things. It will be playing specific things.
I mean, is more complicated compositions that?
No, it doesn't have to. Maybe the modulation of sound. When I play, then he thought, oh my goodness, he's scolding. Why he's scolding? Then let me take care of that.
Okay, so the second interview I'm gonna show you is with another tabla player, as I said, Sanjay Mukherjee, who has a lot of experience performing in Bengali as a Bengali media. musician. And what I would like you to pay attention to here is the choice of language, the vocabulary that is choosing to describe the hierarchies and the relationships between the different musicians. So here we're talking about, okay, the singer should be the leader, but what if the tabla player is more senior? Or what if the harmonium player is more senior? And you'll see what he says.
If you are senior tabla player, so both of the artists is ready to obey you. And if the main artist and the tabla player is senior, then the harmonium player have to listen to them.
What if there is a very senior harmonium player and more junior soloist and tabla player?
The senior harmonium player, if he is a senior harmonium player, then the tabla player should not over kara uchit na, mane dominate. You should not dominate him, as because he is a senior harmonium player. You should not dominate him. The tabla player should not dominate him, and so also he gets that respect from the other artists also, main artists also.
So I hope you liked the video clip and you noticed that Sanjay Mukherjee is using concepts such obedience, respect, overtaking, obedience. So it's quite strong wording. And this is how musicians talk and think about their relationships on stage. But there is not just the stage, there is also the audience. And in the video clip, you saw people moving there. What is very fascinating about North Indian classical music is that particular hierarchies are shown, are displayed also in the audience. So if you go to a Western art music concert, for example, people either sit randomly or maybe the audience layout respects particular social status, who can pay the more expensive ticket. But in Indian music, it is musical competence that regulates where people sit down. So we said that in the stage, the three main roles are at the front of the stage. And in the audience, the proximity to the stage is the marker of musical competence. So the people who sit at the front of the audience are expected to be the people who know music, who understand music, the people the musicians really care about, the people the musicians will keep an eye on and they will pay for. The further back you sit, the more you're making an admission of non-competence, basically. So if you go to an Indian music concert, basically, think about it before you sit down. Think about where you're sitting, because where you sit will define you in terms of your musical competence for the participants, okay? So musicians and knowledgeable people will tend to sit at the front, and everyone knows that. With the result that if you have a musician sitting at the front, a lot of people will be keeping an eye on them. So if there is a very senior musician as an audience member, the people on stage, the musicians on stage, will acknowledge his arrival. They will pay respect to him. They will display particular etiquette. They will take the permission of the senior musician before they start playing, for example, in order to get approval and support. And the other audience members, the less knowledgeable audience members, will keep an eye on the senior musician to see if the senior musician likes the concert or not. So in a way, the senior musician is co-responsible for the good outcome of the performance. And this is very interesting. Two quick observations. First of all, the relationship between the musician in the audience and the stage is a relationship of complementarity. It is what Irving Goffman studied a lot about relationships and complementarity of roles. So basically, when we acknowledge someone as important or senior, we are not only paying our respect to them, but we are also recruiting them in a complementary role. We are complementary and we are recruiting them expecting their support. So the musician who takes permission from the musician in the audience, they're not only saying, I acknowledge you're senior, but they're implicitly saying, and I count on your support, don't let me down. And the senior musicians in the audience, this is exactly like, for example, if one of you invites someone for dinner, okay, you invite someone for dinner to your house, you will be the perfect host because, of course, you want to spend a good evening, you want your guest to have a good evening, but also because then you expect your guest to behave impeccably. If you behave impeccably, your guest is expected to behave impeccably. It's all social relationships that work in this complementary way. Well, many at least. So the senior musician in the audience, the musicians are very conscious of these things. Some musicians are okay with it. A lot of musicians say that they're comfortable, that they would like just to a concert and enjoy as a lay member of the audience, a lay listener, as they say. The truth is that they can't escape the role. But again, the way that they talk about the role is very interesting because they talk in terms of responsibility. And I'll play you here an interview carried out with Manjari Sanare Kelkar, who you saw performing at the beginning of this presentation, and who explained very clearly this responsibility that she feels towards performers, towards junior performers, when she's sitting in the audience as a senior artist.
Sometimes I don't like it, that people are looking, because I want to enjoy. As a common listener, the artist on the stage, when he is a senior artist, then it doesn't matter. But when he or she is an artist who is junior to me, or he's just started his career, then naturally he looks at me as a support. So how am I going? So it's my duty to tell him that yes, it's okay, you are doing well, because it is the responsibility of senior listeners. Many senior listeners, senior artists, they sit like, it's not my nature. Even if I'm not feeling that it's okay, but still he is doing well, he is trying his level best, he has learned and he's trying to express what he's learned. It is my duty to give him support.
So when we go to an Indian music concert, we are witnessing a very complex web of interactions. And what I'm going to play you now is an example of how seniority regulates relationships in concert in a very not unique, but very special circumstance. Can you all see? You can see the video, suppose, yeah. So what's happening in this video clip? This is a concert by sitar player Nayan Ghosh that you can see here. And this is a split screen. You can see the view from two different cameras. This was a project where we were studying audiences. And here, there is Nayan Ghosh. He's the sitar player, but he's also the father of the tabla player. This was one of the first public performances of his young son, Ishan, who was at that time 9 years old. And now he's 18, 19, so you can find him online. He's grown up and he's having his own career, but this is... and this was a very, very sweet concert in a way, because we decided to document this concert because we knew this would be the most supportive environment that a musician could find. So this, by the definition, would be a concert where there would be collaboration between musicians and support between father and son, the support from the father towards the son. But what is interesting is that this concert is taking place in a music school, which is the music school directed by the sitar player. And the young men sitting in the audience are all students of the sitar player. But Indian music works also, musicians define themselves also according to a sort of family trees. So they consider themselves the student of the sitar player, but also brothers of guru, as they say, brothers of teacher of the young tabla player. So what they're expected to do here is to show their support towards the tabla player, while keeping respect and never stepping over the father, who is the senior teacher. So each man here in the audience has to respect the sitar player, but at the same time to show support. And one way in Indian performance through which we show support is by commenting on the volume of the music. Because usually, put it very bluntly, in this concert, the louder you sound, the more important you are. So when you go to Indian music concerts, especially in India, usually there is no much sound check before. And even if there is a sound check, at the beginning of the concert, there is always negotiation of a sound. There will always be musicians asking for the sound level to be adjusted, or people in the audience to ask about adjustment of sound levels. And that is not simply about the sound. It is about displaying allegiances in the public performance. By asking for your sound to be high, I am also showing publicly that I am supporting you. I'm sending you a message of support. Okay. And this is done by many audience members. And the interesting thing is that the sound engineer usually sits at the side of the stage, so not in a position that really allows him to evaluate the quality of the sound. But that doesn't count, because sound is also about negotiation of social relationships in very subtle way, which again affected the music performance. So the view that you have here of the audience is the view from the camera of the sound engineer. So you're seeing what the sound engineer is seeing. And what you will see is that at the beginning of the performance, when the instruments are being tuned, the young man in the audience will give tips for tuning to the young tabla player, and they will ask the sound engineer to raise, to pull up the volume of the tabla player to show their support to the young tabla player. However, the moment the sitar player says it's okay, they stop immediately, because it's their teacher and they have to show respect. So it is a form of negotiation that happens at a split of a second. And this is why I have indicated some titles to guide you. It's about 1 minute, and I'm showing you with some indication what's going on. I am sitting here, but please don't get distracted by me, because as a researcher, I realized what was going on, and I started smiling, because of course I was very happy we were documenting this particular interaction. But don't get distracted by that, and focus on what's happening between stage and audience. And you will notice that this will go on during the first part of the performance. Okay. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this and the enfant prodige, of course. No more enfant nowadays. What I'll do, I will conclude with one last case study, which talks about the interaction during the concert. Musicians' views vary a lot about the extent to which the degree of competence of the listeners can affect the concerts. However, the degree of interaction between audience, stage and off stage varies, but some artists see interaction with the public as an integral element to their performance. One of these artists is this singer that you can see in this picture, Ram Deshpande, is Maharashtra, from the state of Maharashtra, who in an interview before a concert he gave, told me, I try to gauge whether the audience is enjoying the performance or not, who is listening intently. I can understand this through their body language. I know which few people really understand my thoughts behind my presentation. So I slowly build up rapport with those few and look at them at the first bit of the cycle. So it is, Indian music is built in rhythmic cycles, metric cycles, and the first bit of the cycle is usually a moment that is emphasized where everyone comes together. It's usually the end of an improvisation before the beginning of a new phrase, and so on and so forth. Most interestingly, Ram Deshpande said, we musicians have to find some trick so that the audience enjoys the performance. And he was describing his accompanist and his playing as a teamwork, is a team playing. And so what did he mean by tricks? What are the strategies through which he finds this kind of preferential communication, let's say, as Goffman would say? So the concert that I'm going to look at briefly now is a concert that he held the night after this interview. So I was quite curious to see what he would actually do. And it was quite illuminating. It's 13th February 2010 in Nasik. And he performed, as usual, more than one raga, but I'm going to focus now here on a particular composition. It is the first 2 minutes actually, of a composition called a tarana. A tarana is a composition where the singer doesn't really perform lyrics, but performs syllables. And these syllables are meant to highlight rhythmic ability, rhythmic dexterity, virtuosity. This particular tarana, and so the word tarana is an onomatopoeic name for the sounds, tara, nun, tanun, and so on and so forth, that are sang in the performance. And it's set on the meter called tintal, very common in India, a cycle in 16 beats. And Indian rhythmic cycles are usually grouped in groups of metrical units, or beats, we could say, colloquially, and tintal is characterized by 4 groups of 4 beats. And there are strong accents falling on the 1st, the 5th, and the 13th beat, and an empty accent, a void accent, let's say, on the 9th beat. When people listen to this music, audiences and sometimes musicians, when they have their hands free, they accompany the music with a particular clap pattern, a hand clapping pattern, which in tintal is clap, clap, and then a waving gesture, moving away from the body to, and again, clap. And very often audiences, the knowledgeable one, join in clapping. And an audience member who is clapping is not only clapping to follow the music, but is also giving out a clear message of expertise. I clap to the music and I show you that I know how to clap, I know to do it in the proper way, and therefore I am an expert member of the audience. So we go back to the kind of communication, implicit and part of the normal practice of this music. So in this particular moment of the performance, the singer starts to sing a composition, tarana, set in tintal. I'm not going to talk too much here about the melody. It starts as an anacrusis, and the raga here is Raga Marwa, for those who are interested and know this music, but I'll go straight to the video example. What is interesting here, and you will see a picture-in-picture shot again, split picture shot of the stage and the audience. What happens here, that as soon as the composition starts, the singer will present the main melody, but then the tabla player will start playing a solo. Please bear in mind that here tabla player and singer have been playing together several times. They know each other very well. This is a very good working team, let's say. And they are deploying one of the strategies. So the tabla player starts his solo, and it's quite complicated rhythmically. This composition is quite subtle rhythmically because the accents of the melody are slightly displaced compared to the main beats. But what you will see at some point, the singer will start clapping the hands. It is quite fast, so it is 16 beats, but you will perceive it in 8 beats. That is how it's perceived because it's quite fast tempo. But what you will see is that the singer will clap the hand also to guide the audience. The audience will join in with the clapping, but as the end of the solo arrives, there is an increased movement of the audience. And when the solo ends, they all land together on the first beat of the new cycle. However, the tabla player is very clever because instead of playing the first beat of the cycle, he will just point it with a hand gesture and everyone will join in with an exclamation of appreciation. This is a typical way of audiences to express their appreciation, is to express things like wow, hebat, and things like that. And you will hear the audience expressing this. It's about 1.5 minutes, and this is the last video example I'm playing you. I hope you're gonna enjoy it. And here we are. Oh, sorry. That was the previous one. And here we are. So the melody has been established and the tabla solo starts. And the singer now is clapping the pattern to show the audience and guide them through the complexities of the solo. And the performance goes on, but with, for the musicians, with the renewed reassurance that is being a very, very successful performance. Okay, so to conclude, a couple of reflections. You could see here that when they reached the end of the solo and the first beat of the cycle, instead of playing it, they were pointing at this crucial moment. But there was the musicians pointing, even the tampura player at the back, who normally would keep a very restrained behavior, he took the liberty to join in, and the audience members also joined in. In a way, for a moment, this was a moment of massive kind of joining in and relief in the music. So let's think about Goffman again. In his study of interaction, and in particular of the case in which members of a leading group manage a temporary relaxation of formal behavior with another party, Goffman points out how such relaxation of distance in roles provides one means by which a feeling of spontaneity and involvement can be generated in interaction. The temporary abeyance of the roles which regulate North Indian classical music performance presents characteristics which, in my view, this is my personal view are not dissimilar from those attributed by Bakhtin to carnivals, which marked the suspension, a temporary suspension of hierarchical rank, privileges, norms, and prohibitions. And what I find interesting in Bakhtin is also that he said that carnival for him was not a show, was not a spectacle seen by people, but it was something that was lived in the same way that we see that the music performance is experienced in participants' bodies. So the intensity of the experience of coming together on the first beat of the cycle, which in Indian music is called the sam, allows participants to share a sense of relief, which is intrinsic in the structure of the music, and this relief is enhanced by the effectiveness of the collective involvement that can be understood in terms of what Victor Turner would have called the communitas, so the sense of the kind of sharing experience, the sharing of a special moment. The shared enjoyment brought about by the collective interaction allows everyone to proceed with a renewed sense of appreciation for the music. And as I said before, the artist can enjoy a strengthened confidence in the felicitous development of their performance. Now, in Hindustani classical performance, clapping to the tal, the rhythmic cycle is called the tal, as Thomas Turino pointed out, is not just conceived as an essential part of the musical sound. However, and this is what I think, in practice, I think that clapping along with the music is more than mainly a guide for skillful listening, as it is suggested not just by Turino, but by musicians, by listeners, and in general discourse about music. The practice of clapping to the music embeds the performance. Sì? Sì? Tutto ok? Ok. Okay, embeds the performance with the potential for genuinely participatory moments, which can be used strategically by the artist. So in a way, I am challenging the idea of this music being totally presentational. Hindustani singers often clap to the meter during the solo of an accompanist, and this allows the musicians to guide the audience, as we saw, through a rhythmically complex and often displacing moment, giving participants a tool to keep their bearings in the music. And this process brings together audiences whose musical skills are sufficient to follow the metric structure, but maybe not that advanced and not enough to appreciate the subtleties of the solo. But these moments share the structural features and practices with the participatory model of performance described by Turino. So the clapping pattern offers an open form, a cyclical form, which invites people with different musical abilities to join in a non-pre-arranged manner, affording the opportunity to add to the intensity of the performance experience. Ultimately, it gives musicians like Ram Deshpande the possibility to influence the positive reception of the music, implicitly recognizing the value of participation and the sense of togetherness and belonging that it indexes as an assurance of the successful unfolding of the event. So finally, and with this I really conclude, if drawing on Goffman again, a team is a grouping in relation to an interaction or a series of interaction in which the relevant definition of the situation is maintained, then the grouping which is relevant to the unfolding and a successful performance of this tarana, of this composition, has to include the audience. And while there is no doubt that the Indian music performance is characterized by features that can be described as presentational, in the study of the actualization of this music, we need to allow for a model which takes into account and recognizes the importance of moments of participations. And one last thing is that the video clip that I played you, it didn't have a very good audio. That was the camera audio. And that is one reason why I did it, because when I went back to the UK after the fieldwork and I used the separate audio tracks, the professional audio recording that we did, at the end of that solo, from those microphones, you can't hear the audience, and it doesn't really work musically. Musically, there is not the emphasis that should be there. And in fact, even when we did the proper, let's say, mix, we had to add the camera audio to include the audience. In this way, it's evident that the participation becomes really integral to the music performance. Thanks a lot, and I'll stop.
Thank you ever so much, Laura, for this wonderful presentation. and a virtual applause as usual, everyone does. And many fascinating things come up, and especially many parallels with also other musical traditions in the world. And there is first of all a comment in the chat from one of the audience, Ranjani, who just wrote, while most of what you're saying about the audience is true, the first row is usually also occupied by a dubious organizer or so-called senior critic. I'm sure you're aware of this thing.
Yes, is it Ranjani? I don't know if it is the Ranjani who I know who noticed this. I don't know if it is the Ranjani I'm thinking of. It is, yes, it is absolutely true. Yes, Ranjani. Well, Ranjani, then she should talk, because she's one of the musicians that I've been working with for the longest. And we've also had many conversations with Ranjani. Yes, Ranjani, it is true. There are dubious organizers, there are senior critics, and it is very complicated. And I'm sure that Ranjani can tell you. Well, she told me many interesting stories, and I'm sure that you got many interesting stories to tell as well. It is absolutely true, because as I said before, and maybe I should repeat it, that when people sit there, they're making a statement of importance, and it is their statement, and it is their position, and it is part of a number of social strategies. So, for example, maybe Ranjani doesn't know this story, but if I am in India and I have to go to a concert of someone who doesn't know me and I do not know them, if I go there just because I want to see the music, I don't care where I sit. But for example, once I had to go to a concert of a singer who didn't know me, I really liked it, and I wanted to approach her in the backstage afterwards. So what I did, during the concert, I went and sat in the second row straight away, because I knew that I would be noticed straight away as someone of potential interest. In a way, I gave my visiting card even the moment that I sat in the audience. But yes, it is very complex. And concert organizers, though, if they are clever, they can play this card very, very smartly. So, for example, I don't know if you know the Darbar Festival that takes place every year in the UK, in London, and is one of the biggest Indian music festivals that take place in the UK. And what I know is that when the organizer recruits the musicians and invites the musicians commit not only to their own performance, but they also commit to attend each other's performance. And what happens is that in this way, the organizer is guaranteeing that there is a very knowledgeable audience sitting in the front row for every concert, and is sure that the musicians on stage are going to give their best. So in a way, he already sets up a situation where musicians will try to display. But thank you, Ranjani, for highlighting this, because it is true. It is a very complex. But I think that Ranjani's comment also contributes to giving everyone the idea of the subtleties and the complexities. It's never clear cut. Of course, they can also be elderly people or people who are physically unable to sit down, for example, and in that case, they will sit at the back of the room on a chair, and they might be very senior musicians, and people will still keep an eye on them, knowing that they're senior musicians, for example. So there are a lot of nuances and a lot of variations, let's say, to the general guidelines that I have highlighted. Did I answer, Ranjani?
I think yes.
Yes. I hope so.
Yes.
But thank you for coming. So
Yeah,
maybe you know, the problem is I should have asked, then I should have acknowledged Ranjani's presence here, and I should have asked for permission before starting myself.
Well, thank you, Ranjani, again, so for this comment. And I mean, the floor is open to questions, and you can unmute yourself and ask a question directly, or you can pop up the question in the chat. And what was very interesting that I found in the video of the female soloist that you showed in the interaction between the audience and the senior audience and the young player. What was interesting is the last sentence that she said in the video, in the interview, where she said, "It is my duty to give support." And I was thinking, where does this duty come from? This idea of having duty to give support, is that part of the Indian tradition, or where does this duty come from?
I think it's a very good question. I think it is very complex, and you can answer it from many different perspectives. I think that for many musicians, it is really a very honest way to reflect on their experiences as well. So maybe they are senior musicians, they're established musicians, but they also sympathize with the junior people because maybe they remember and they know that it is a difficult process to become established in a way, but they're also very conscious of the fact that people are looking at them. So once I interviewed a very, very senior singer who told me, if the concert is good, it's fine for me, but and I relax and I enjoy it. But if something is going wrong, then I get very nervous because I'm conscious that people are looking at me, and then I will be very careful, and I will be very careful to show that I'm appreciating, because there is a kind of a sense of responsibility. So in a way, there is this recognition that you are also responsible for something that is going on. And yeah, I think it comes from the, but the sense of duty in Indian performance is not just limited to this. Musicians go on stage feeling very responsible that they're representing their teachers, that they're representing their musical lineage. So it is that the sense of duty, in social duty, really moves across many different realms in a way. Yeah, so thank you for raising it, yes.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat. So one from Gianluca Chiellini. Can you tell us something more about the money relationship between soloist and tempura players? So it seems somehow not only an employer-employee, but also a patron-client relationship.
Yes, again, thank you for the question. So maybe I should have said a few words when I talked about the tempura players. So when I said that usually the students of the teachers, the students of the teacher, the students of the singer, I should have added that sitting on stage with your teacher, it's part of your learning process. So students see it as an opportunity to learn. They learn how to sit on stage, they gain singing experience, they gain stage experience. And it is something that is done without any form of monetary retribution, basically. They do it for free. They're students, you don't get paid by your teacher, basically. That is, you do it for your teacher, you do it for yourself. It's part of a very strong bond that exists between teacher and student in Indian classical music. Traditionally, the students wouldn't really, in the old days when music was under the patronage of the courts, for example, the students wouldn't pay their teachers the way that we do in the West, for example, for Western art music. It would be a relationship, it would be a total dedication to the teacher, there would be a compensation, let's say, in kind, in trust, in the musician would choose the student, and the student would be loyal to the teacher. Nowadays it's changed, so musicians need to survive, basically. The economy of Indian music has changed in the last 100 years, so there are financial retributions, but a teacher would never pay a student for going on stage. It would be the student that would be honored, let's say, to be on stage and sit with the teacher. So the Tampura players don't get financial reward.
Okay, so there is a question from Giuseppe Sanfratello. So thank you very much, Laura, for such a fascinating lecture. So regarding the issue of strategies through which musicians negotiate in performance, especially in, quote, making a good impression on a specific audience that knows very well that musical repertoire. So the question is how and to what extent can we measure the way musicians adjust their performance accordingly? And he also says that, I mean, like in the case studies you have clearly presented today, how can we notice the adjustment in musicians' performance?
So again, there is not a single practice. Many and if you talk to musicians and interview with musicians, you will get all sorts of answers. Musicians, so when it comes to the choice of the repertoire, let's say, usually musicians will try to perform in an average concert, let's say average, in a normal length, no, average, I don't want to give a negative connotation, but in the normal length concert in North Indian classical music, usually at least a couple of ragas get performed, and musicians will try to find the ragas of contrasting mood, and these ragas needs to stick to the right time of the day. If you are performing in a big festival with a lot of other performers, you will have to adjust maybe your choices even at the last minute, depending on who's played before you, whether the time of the day is changed. So that already puts some constraints on the musician's choice. But when it comes to the audience, some musicians will tell you that they decide on how they feel, regardless of the level of competence of the audience. Other musicians will tell you that they choose some ragas, some music that they think is more complex or more accessible, depending on whether they have a more knowledgeable or less knowledgeable audience. I have talked to many musicians from many different musical lineages, and really there is not a single solution. And some musicians will tell you that if they see that the audience doesn't respond very well, they might adapt the performance. I mean, the performance is developed in, so this is improvised music, but like all improvised music, it's not just chance music. There is a very clear structure. There is a particular development and unfolding of the music that you are expected to do. But some musicians might choose within a particular raga certain compositions, or they might decide to spend more time on one section rather than another section, depending on the audience. Some musicians say that they are not affected at all, and they will not change their plans. Or the musicians say that they might change their plan as the performance develops. So in a way, you can measure how the musicians adjust by looking at what is performed and how it's performed and talking to them, of course. One thing that unfortunately I have to say, sometimes you see, is that sometimes you see Indian musicians performing in the West, for example, they tend to do the faster, more virtuosic part of the music. They put more emphasis on the kind of the virtuosic side, because they think the Western audiences might not appreciate the alap, the beginning, the part which is slower in free rhythm, which actually is a really important part of the performance in Indian music, because that's where the music gets in, the identity of the music is introduced. And sometimes I've seen musicians who would perform, let's say, a full performance in all its parts in India, but then when they come to the West, they sacrifice the parts that they think the Western audiences might not appreciate that much, which I think it's a pity, because you end up never educating your audiences like that. And I don't think it's correct, it's right. And in India, this would be criticized as an attitude, because what do? You abandon the setup, let's say, the identity of the music to go to what they call the gimmicks. You know, there's a lot of discourse about this, but these are the kind of macro ways to evaluate the adjustments. There are many more subtle ways, and the fact that audiences can give you, knowledgeable audiences show you in real time that they're following and that they're liking it, that there is a feedback, is a constant feedback for the musician. I hope Giuseppe, I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. There is another sort of question, curiosity from Stefania Mastro Giovanni, who would like to know whether Bollywood has contributed to making Indian music more European and commercial, so along to the...
This is a good question. I don't know. I think we should ask some Bollywood expert here. My gut feeling is that this is the famous chicken egg question. What does it come first? You know, Bollywood or Indian classical music? Is it the Westerners that they have gone? Well, what we know historically is that North Indian classical music arrived in the West at the beginning of the 20th century. They really became well known to the wider Western audiences through jazz collaborations in the 50s, pop collaborations more in the 60s. And for a long time, and still now, I think that in the West, when people talk about Indian music, they consciously or unconsciously, they're referring to Hindustani classical music. Bollywood, I think it's a bit more of a recent, I mean, in terms of decades, not talking about years, it's about decades, but it's more recent phenomena, the discovery of Bollywood music. But that is entangled in a more complex discourse about the encounter between Indian and Western music, also in popular music genres, which of course, you know, Indian music is not one form of music, it's very complex, and very often it happens transnationally. And Bollywood is definitely nowadays part of that kind of transnational scenario. So I think, and also when we talk about how Indian music has become European, I think we need to look at particular genres, because the music that I've presented here is very difficult to define as Europeanized in a way, in those terms. I would say that is not being affected by Bollywood. What happens is that this classical music ends up in Bollywood. That is what has happened also historically and has affected Bollywood a lot. But thank you for raising this issue, because it is very, very complex.
Thank you. There is another comment in the chat from Professor Shalpi. So very well done, well structured and presented.
Thank you.
Most interesting, the role of the public in the performance. That's really true. Also an ethical lesson to learn. Concord is fundamental for success of every enterprise relationship. Yeah.
Thank you for the nice words and the good comment. And I think, yes, I think the answer is yes. And I think this is also what I was saying before, that even if there are frictions, musicians are very careful in keeping them subtle and hidden. So one thing that one problem that I have when I talk about this to my students in Durham, and I tell them about frictions, then every time I show them a concert, they try to say, oh, I've seen a friction. And I say, no, there was not a friction. And most likely you wouldn't be able to spot it. This is the point. In fact, the episodes where friction is visible, they become stories that are told for years and years. It's very rare that it's seen, because concord needs to be the ultimate result, even when there is no concord.
Yes, so there are other couple of questions in the chat. I've got, so one from Maria Giuliana Rizzuto. So I've got the impression that the kind of support that more experienced musicians give to younger performers is similar to what is given during the learning phase. So the question is, does this also happen in this cultural context?
Yes, Juliana, thank you. Sorry, yes, Maria, thank you for this great comment, because it opens up yet another issue. The idea that the senior musician looks after the younger one is very established. So the idea is that even when you are on stage and you are junior and you are a singer and you have a senior tabla player, for example, you will be very nervous trying not to offend, you will always try to respect the tabla player, but the way that the tabla player who is senior will present himself to you is always going to be that of it's a kind of avuncular relationship, is that of an elderly giving you support and advice. And even in cases where I've seen friction was always covered by this role, like I am giving you guidance, I am giving you advice, I am telling you how to do things. So these relationships becomes also a kind of a dress for more complex tensions, if it makes sense.
Okay,
but thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
And always nice to see you. It's nice to see you after too many years.
Yes.
So there is another question from Lorenzo in the chat. Considering that seniority is so pervasive in Indian culture, do you recognize structures of power between participants similar to those you have discussed today, also in other musical genre or performance contexts?
Absolutely, yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I've talked about is very much focusing on the etiquette that you will find in a concert of North Indian classical music, but in other genres, in other contexts, even when you talk about folk music, there is always, seniority is what really regulates everything, all the relationships. And you cannot ignore it. Also as a researcher, when you liaise with musicians, you need to take that into account. I'll tell you a nice story. When I write my articles, I acknowledge musicians, like I did today in my first slide. I acknowledge the musicians in alphabetical order, because it's general practice for many Western publishers. And also the alphabetical order gets me out of the problem of acknowledging people according to seniority. You know, it would be quite tricky having to select who I acknowledge first, second, or third. So if I'm writing something where I am acknowledging teacher and students, it's easy. I acknowledge the teacher and the students. But if I'm acknowledging a lot of people with several senior musicians, I will go for the alphabetical order. But once I had a musician who came to me, a junior musician, who said, I was very happy that you acknowledged me in your article, but I am embarrassed because you put my name before that of a senior musician, and that is not right. And I had to explain to her that I was following the alphabetical order and I wasn't meaning to put her in front of someone more senior. So even in the acknowledgement of an article, these things are picked and noticed, basically.
So thank you, Laura. Very, very fascinating. And as I was saying before, there are many parallels with other music culture, especially the Arab world, for example. This idea of Iraqis and the role of the sheikh, the old master, not just in the performance, but in the relationship between the student and the master. So we have, I think we have maybe 1 minute more for another question. Otherwise we have come to an end for today presentation. All right. I think there are no other questions to answer, and thank you again. Thank you ever so much again for this
Yeah, I would like to thank you for giving me this great opportunity, to thank Ismail, thank everyone for coming, and Ranjani, I think it's bedtime for you now. Yes, yeah. But we can go on, Ranjani. You are basically committing yourself to an interview. Very, you are committing to an interview very soon in front of many witnesses. But yes, much appreciated that I had an audience. I had Ranjani from India as well. I don't know if there are others, but yes, thank you, and thanks to everyone.